How's everyone doing?
Good.
How many people have taken a salary negotiation workshop before? Okay, good amount of you. How many of those were WorkSmart or Start Smart workshops? Most of them? Or
hard to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for choosing the Achieving Equal Pay panel or track today. This has been an incredible day. I went to the first one back in 2014. I didn't go in 2016, but I just think that this group and energy just keeps growing and growing, and I definitely needed this after the past year. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you. The run of show today is that we're going to give an overview of some of the salary negotiation training programs that are happening in Massachusetts and equal pay initiatives in general. We're going to talk about the City of Boston's initiative, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts initiative, as well as some of the work that AAUW is doing nationwide. Then we're going to do a condensed salary negotiation workshop because we feel like a lot of people in this room might want to bring these back to their communities, but usually the workshops take about 2 hours long, so we don't want to cut into your dinner time or your socializing time, but we'll be able to give you as much tips as possible, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So I will turn it over to Alex, and then we can do some brief introductions and go from there.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. So as Samantha mentioned, we're going to kind of cover a lot of bases today, and I'm also going to be sort of wearing two hats. So my name is Alex Howley. I'm the program manager for AAUW WorkSmart here in Boston. It is one of the salary negotiation programs that Samantha mentioned. We're going to get into the initiatives kind of as a whole and how they fit into the ecosystem here. But I actually work for the DC-based organization, the American Association of University Women, one of the oldest women's organizations in the country, actually. So I run the Boston program, so I'm going to speak about the Boston initiative in more depth, but I'm also representing the organization. So a little nuanced, and then obviously Samantha and Sarah are here representing the Treasurer's Office and Office of Economic Empowerment. So this is us, in case you can't tell. We all look like we could be related, we realized once we put our photos side by side. So quick introduction, how many of you have heard of AAUW before? Raise of hands. Okay, so many of you, and we have our hands in a lot of things, policy, legal advocacy. Where I really fit into the organization is running these salary negotiation programs. So we have two programs, which Samantha already kind of referenced. So we have a program called AAUW Start Smart, and then we also have WorkSmart, which is the one that you probably are the most familiar with here in Boston. Start Smart is basically a slightly modified version geared towards college-age students. Obviously, some of the things that you also want to address when you're thinking about salary negotiation when you're in the college phase is thinking about budgeting, understanding take-home pay, things like that. So there's just a few other kind of additional layers that we teach college women. And then WorkSmart, which is really kind of our bread and butter, we run here in Boston and with the state of Massachusetts. So just a little background, we launched our city initiative in partnership with the City of Boston in 2015. This was really our pilot program to see how can we scale a workshop model to help women advocate for themselves for equal pay. So since launching the pilot program in 2015, we've launched in 7 new cities and states, including Massachusetts, which Samantha will talk about. And then if you're not familiar with the Women's Advancement Office, I know you already heard Mayor Walsh speak today, and Tanya Del Rio, the Executive Director for the Women's Advancement Office for the City of Boston, is speaking next door as we speak. But basically the office is really focused on equity for women. Their key areas of focus are economic equity, safety, and empowerment. So where I support them is really around the economic equity. So really quickly, just kind of understanding and outlining how these salary negotiations sort of fit into an initiative. This is a quick kind of glance of how Mayor Walsh and the City of Boston have approached this kind of multi-pronged approach to closing the gender pay gap. You'll see a major area of focus for them is employers, which we're not really going to focus on today, but I've put Brenna Callahan's email in here if you guys are interested in learning more about their work. But basically they've partnered up with 225 employers here in Boston to actually measure the pay gap locally. So employers are sharing anonymous wage data to actually look at W-2 data to say, how does Boston stack up against other cities? It's really innovative, and it's definitely helping inform some of the ways that we approach pay equity programming here in the city. Where I fit in is supporting individual women. So again, I feel like a caveat to this entire program is that the burden by no means is on individual women to close the gender pay gap. Like, we should start right off the bat by just acknowledging that. This is a Band-Aid. While we're waiting for legislation to catch up in other places and we're waiting for employer culture to change, this is really where the individual women piece kind of fits in. So the burden's not on you. We're helping you in the meantime while we're waiting for all these cultural pieces to change. And then the other piece is legislation. I kind of just alluded to it, which Samantha and Sarah are going to talk about a bit more about the Massachusetts equal pay legislation. But basically, these are kind of the three core areas that need to be addressed in order to help close the pay gap. And that's what the City of Boston's been working on. So this is just a quick snapshot of the program to date. Again, the City of Boston is the pilot. So this is where we have the most amount of data. I don't think Anne is still in the room, but Anne Bookman, who was here earlier, her team actually did an analysis after year one. So if you all, when you're heading out, want to grab a copy of the report to see just how the program's been running, there's a lot of really great, especially qualitative data that shows that an initiative like this has done more than just help women advocate for equal pay. What it's really done is kind of spark this ripple effect where a lot of us, and I know you guys can probably speak to this too, I was personally raised in a family where we didn't talk about money. So just talking about money and talking about the pay gap and starting to kind of pay it forward and having women come out of the workshops and tell other women has been really powerful. And it's a harder thing to measure, but we're definitely seeing the results of that. Looking at the actual data, we've run just over 350 workshops in Boston since the fall of 2015. We've trained 8,000 women. I was doing the math earlier. We've been fortunate to have over 100 workshop hosts and partners to help us make these programs possible. We've reached women in all 23 neighborhoods, and we're still kind of pacing at over 20 attendees per workshop. So really healthy initiative so far. We have really aggressive goals, but we're chipping away at it, and this is where we're at so far. So I'm going to hand it off to Samantha.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Office of Economic Empowerment and why we're doing this work. So the Office of Economic Empowerment is an office of the State Treasury in Massachusetts. We're the first office of its kind in the country that's really focused on this type of work. How many people in the room are from Massachusetts? So most of you are. Commonwealthers. So Treasurer Goldberg found the office on day one when she was sworn in 2015, and she made pay equity one of the cornerstones of her mission, not just with the Office of Economic Empowerment, but of all the work that she does throughout Treasury. So when she promotes pay equity policies by really walking the walk, she offers 12-week paid parental leave to every employee within Treasury. She did an audit of pay practices throughout Treasury and fixed those practices. And she also implements just general practices that will promote equity throughout her office, but also giving recommendations to other public and private offices in Massachusetts. Through the Office of Economic Empowerment, one of the first things that we did was host roundtables across Massachusetts where we talked to employers, stakeholders, and community members about ways that we could achieve pay equity in different ways through public education and awareness and employment programs on equal pay. So we developed several different initiatives to help target pay equity. One of them is called the Women's Economic Empowerment Series, which is a program that is sponsored by Citizens Bank. We do a lot of private-public initiatives in our office, where we pair financial education programming on issues that can lead to the gender pay gap, such as, or lifetime losses, such as saving for retirement, with the salary negotiation component. So we started hosting those workshops in 2016, and we continue. That's a really healthy program that we continue to bring across Massachusetts. She also launched a website called Equal Pay MA, which I'm going to save so Sarah can talk about that. But that's a really exciting tool that we have in our office. And then this year, the treasurer really wanted to bring these standalone salary negotiation workshops that the city of Boston does statewide. So we created a partnership with the Massachusetts community colleges and with the commissions on the status of women across Massachusetts to bring these 2-hour-long workshops that we're minutes away from doing a mini one of across the state, and that's been a really exciting partnership because it brings the workshop directly to the people that we want to serve. So that's the general gist of some of the workshops that we deliver and the ways that we've been able to, with minimal resources, disseminate this type of information and educate more people on pay equity and tools that they can use to achieve pay equity in their lives. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah so she can talk about equalpayma.com.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me, or do I need to bring the mic closer? Can you hear me now? Yes. Lovely. Okay, so as Samantha and Alex have said, my name is Sarah Arkel. I'm a digital engagement manager in the Office of Economic Empowerment at the State Treasurer's Office with Samantha, and we are really, really keen on using public service to innovate and to bring services to people where they're at. So we're really excited about using technology and about using digital platforms to give people what they need exactly where they're at. And I think a lot of government and just a lot of services are really moving online in a really cool way, so we're excited to be part of that. And one of our biggest online ventures is something called equalpayma.com, which some of you may have heard of, maybe not, but the Treasurer launched it in 2015 on Equal Pay Day. Or in 2016 on Equal Pay Day, rather. And one of the coolest things you can do on it is calculate your wage gap by race, age, and occupation. So I think we throw out a lot of numbers, and they're really general numbers, but on equalpayma.com you can get specific. And we use census data to kind of be able to let you calculate that. And it also puts it into really tangible terms. As you'll see here, it shows you, how many cups of coffee a day you're missing, how many months of rent, hours of daycare. So it's disheartening and really tough to look at. Sometimes I go in there and just see what people are missing, and it's really disheartening. But I think it's awesome that it puts it in such tangible terms for everybody to grasp. And moving on to the next slide, there are a lot of other really cool things you can do on the website. So the first thing is you can sign up for a monthly newsletter if you want to stay up to date on all things wage equality in Massachusetts. We have a little bit under 1,000 folks signed up right now, so if you want to be part of that growing community, you can sign up for a newsletter there. You can download our business toolkit, which is basically a toolkit for employers and companies to understand why pay equity in the workplace is important, and understand how they can implement it in kind of easy ways. I know most of us here probably understand that equal pay is a moral imperative, and that's kind of all we need, but I think it's good to frame it in other ways as well so more people can take it up. You can also register for one of the workshops that Samantha mentioned, both the Women's Economic Empowerment Series as well as our standalone Just Ask salary negotiation workshops. You can calculate your wage gap, as I mentioned, and you can send your employer an anonymous email if you think that you are being discriminated against in the workplace, if you think there is a pay gap, which oftentimes there is. If you think there's any sort of discrimination in the workplace, you can send them an anonymous email. And I think to date, approximately 100 have been sent, which is, I wish none had been sent, because there shouldn't be discrimination in the workplace to begin with, but unfortunately there is. So we have this tool where you can say, hey, something's not right, please do something about it. So that's an overview of our digital platforms.
When you send out the anonymous email, does anything do you get any responses from employers or anything like that, or is it more just kind of like a note that's sort of sent to them?
It's more of a note saying like, hey, something isn't right in the company. Like, do you know about the gender wage gap? Do you know like about these tools that you can implement very easily to fix this? It's kind of giving them, identifying a problem and suggesting solutions for them.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Before we get started, if anyone came in late, there are workbooks over on the right, so feel free to grab one of those, as well as tons of other resources and materials.
Okay, great. So that's kind of our sort of high-level introduction to the initiatives. Before we kind of jump into what the workshop sort of looks like and how we approach actually teaching women to advocate for themselves, does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
So the information that you gathered, that you transposed onto how many cups of coffee you don't have, did you get that off the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
Yes. When the website, so all of the information, all the wage gap data is from the census, and then the information about cups of coffee, it's like Red Sox tickets, some other things are, I think, taken from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and some other government level websites.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Hi, Donna from Western Mass, and excited to work with you all to bring these workshops to Western Mass. A couple of questions on that equal pay MA. I can't tell because it's too far away and my vision is failing. Is that intersectional? So if you're a black woman, does it show different cups of coffee and so forth?
Yeah, so you put in, so if you put in your age and your occupation, so the occupation is broken down by the census, how the census defines occupation. So you're not going to find something that's like so specific and matches exactly what you do, but the general field of what you do. And then when it calculates your wage gap, you click on whatever racial identity you identify with, and it changes all of the information.
Okay, and then I understood when I first started talking with you all that WorkSmart was not available in Spanish, and maybe this is an AAUW question. By the way, I was a former co-president of AAUW Connecticut. Are there plans to make it in Spanish version as well?
There sure is. So something that I'll talk about towards the end, AAUW actually just rolled out an online version of the workshop. So it's still kind of in our soft launch phase. We're going through working out some kinks, but a big part of kind of launching that first is that we want to make sure that we have that also accessible in Spanish. So over the next few months, we should be rolling out an in-person Spanish version and an online Spanish version. But in the meantime, one thing that the City of Boston is doing is going through a translation of the workbook so that we can start kind of taking action with that a little bit faster here in Boston. Yeah. And then we're hoping to, once we kind of, now that we have the online tool, the translations for the autonomous learning tool is actually easier. So we should be able to start kind of rolling out more and more languages, especially as we reach new parts of the country. I see one more question in the back.
I just have a question that's sort of two-part. Like, first of all, I think that this workshop and what you're looking for would be great for the women that I work with, who were coming out of situations where they were not empowered and were putting back into the workforce. But what's interesting for me is working in the nonprofit world, I want to know how to negotiate, because I've been in situations where I tell them what I want and they tell me it's nonprofit and you have to lower your expectations. We can only do this for you. And like, I feel bad because I want to help people and I don't want to feel bad. You know, I want to have a living wage and I want to save and stuff like that. So we were just talking about like in the nonprofit view of things, like just some tools for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a thing that we can kind of touch on as we sort of go through the content. I personally made the transition into this role from for-profit, and I definitely saw, you know, as I was looking through, when I did my objective market research before I made my transition, you can definitely see the massive discrepancies between different industries. But you know, the data is kind of there to empower you. So hopefully also going through the objective market research will help you. But then the other thing, you know, when it comes to salary, we can teach you some tools, but a lot of it's so personal. And I think what happens in nonprofit, especially because they're very female dominant, you know, we do feel like we own this budget, right? Like we want to protect this budget, you know, it's in our, we care about the mission, everything like that. And so one thing that I heard an executive female at a pretty successful nonprofit say recently is like, you know, while women kind of sit and say like we want to be a good representative of the organization and focus on the budget, your male counterparts oftentimes are saying, well, I want this much money. So, that's kind of like a qualitative thing to say, but there's just a lot of data out there that shows it. As we look at kind of female dominant industries right now, the data is really interesting because industries like education and nursing, things that have always been female dominant where the pay is kind of arbitrarily already a little bit lower, as men are starting more and more to move into these industries, they're making higher salaries. So there's still something wrong there, and it's kind of a bigger conversation, but it's important to be aware that like I said, as men are moving into these industries, we're still seeing this incredible wage discrepancy. Do you guys have any thoughts on, you guys are in government, so.
I mean, I worked in the nonprofit and government sector my whole career, and I think that we all feel that way. And as Alex said, we'll get into more specifics about ways that you can, if you're the one looking at the budget and you know that it's hard to ask for more money. And I'm looking at a former colleague right now as we used to crunch the budget all the time at a very small nonprofit that just the two of us worked at. But it's still, there are other ways that you can ask for more too, and we'll talk about other benefits that you can ask for, and there's just other ways that I think that employers really need to be respecting and investing in their people power. So that really is a conversation that needs to be happened. But I'll turn over to Sarah. Do you want to?
I was just going to say, when we talk about objective market research, I think, and specifically we're talking about nonprofit work or government work, I think it's really important to ground that objective market research in whatever field you're in. Obviously, if somebody is a financial analyst on Wall Street, they're going to be looking at very different salaries than if someone's like a financial analyst at a nonprofit or for the government or what have you, right? So I think there's still objective research for nonprofits and for government and for that field, and I think that it's super compelling to bring to a boss or an employer that research for your particular field.
And Samantha brought up a good point, which we're going to get to in a minute. But when we talk about compensation, even though we talk about this as a salary negotiation workshop, really what we're talking about is your full compensation package. So where a lot of places can't meet you in the middle for salary, sometimes things that cost them next to nothing, like title changes or flex work schedules or things like that, it's a value to you, and it's actually like a dollar amount to you because you're saving money and commuting and childcare and things like that. It's tangible. It's not for them. You know what I mean? So there are ways, and we'll get into it in a minute. But yeah, so that was a great point. Any final questions on the initiative piece before? Go ahead, Ryan.
And this is a bit nitty-gritty, so we can take it offline. But let's say someone in this room becomes like a mayor of Medford or a mayor of Worcester, right? And it's like, how can I implement these programs? How can we do this? Can you talk a bit about the nitty-gritty of how these partnerships are formed and implemented, and how we can go about creating more of these partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. So these partnerships are directly through the American Association of University Women. If it was a mayor in another part of the state also, it could come through the Office of Economic Empowerment. Just kind of whatever ways that we can sort of amplify each other's work is always helpful. But basically, it's kind of like a licensing MOU that you would go through with AAUW, and it varies very drastically depending on the size of the city and the scale of the initiative. Like if you're just looking to run 10 workshops, that's pretty easy to implement. If you're looking to, like in Kansas, Missouri right now, we're trying to figure out how to train 1 million women. So, casual. So it's a lot of kind of thought partnership, really. This is new for us, and we're, as an organization, have actually set a goal to train 10 million women in the next 5 years, I believe. So we're just kind of looking for as many thought partners and leaders in different communities to help us bring these really everywhere across the country. So, and then there's also online too, so we'll get into kind of next steps and ways that you can work with us. But yeah, thanks for asking, Ryan.
Procurement is so fun. So.
Okay, great. So this is, again, kind of like a sample introduction of how we teach salary negotiation. So this is, first what I'm going to do is just kind of explain our approach, and then we're going to go through some of the sample slides that are in the workshop. But really quickly, so this is basically the outline of the workshop. So we start off every salary negotiation session by just kind of talking about and introducing the gender pay gap. Even though it's really a salary negotiation workshop, this is something that we do to contextualize it. You know, we're running these workshops to close the pay gap. And it's honestly, you know, unless you're like the three of us up here who like live and breathe this stuff, you're probably not at brunch talking about the gender pay gap with your friends. Well, actually, many people in this room probably are. You're here with me. But so understanding the pay gap and really kind of digging into the data, just because I think we spend so much time too hearing, you know, the 80 cents number, right? We know women make about 80 cents on a man's dollar, but that's only such a small picture of what, like when we're talking about intersectionality, what women of color make. When you get into data around people that are LGBTQ, there's just so much more information and nuance to this kind of pay gap that is left off the table when we just talk about, you know, equal pay day in April and that 80 cents number. So we get into that and talk about the intersectionality at the beginning. Then we get into knowing your value. To be clear, know your value is not your personal value. That's not what we get into. Basically, the way that we approach teaching salary negotiation at AAUW is it's almost through a business lens, right? We want to know how to talk the most effectively to a business. So in Know Your Value, what we try to get participants to do is really start to break down what they do day to day and what the bigger impact is that has on their organization. And then we work with them to quantify it and actually build what we call value statements so that you're able to say, through my efforts to do X, Y, Z, it generated X and led to this. So like we're painting a very clear picture, connecting the dots of like what you're doing within your organization and the impact that you're having for them. So that way, I mean, it's easier obviously when you're talking about roles like sales, right? Where you're saying like, through my efforts to, you know, engage and meet 100 new clients in a quarter, it generated, you know, upwards of $250,000 for the organization. It's obviously easy when you work at generating revenue to connect the dots like that, but we can make it work for everything. People tell me all the time that they can't quantify their work. We can make it work for anything. So we get into that. We get into benchmarking your target salary, and we actually work with you to build a range. So basically our practice, and we'll get into it in a minute, is instead of just asking for, I know I want $70,000, asking for a range so that you're actually setting yourself up for success and benefits too. And then we get into strategy. So we talk a lot about deflection. In Massachusetts, this is where we talk a little bit about the Mass Equal Pay Law. And then just, you know, the logistics, right? The timing, like how to ask, things like that. All right. So Sarah, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Yes. So I'm sure all of you know what the gender pay gap is, right? Is there anyone that doesn't know what it is? No, can't imagine that person would be in this room here today, but maybe. So like I said before, you can calculate your gender pay gap on equalpayma.com. We also have this in detail fact sheet, and there are copies over there. You can find it on the website, and it's all about the different ways that identities impact the gender wage gap. So like Alex said, that 80 cents on the dollar number is the national statistic for the average woman compared to the average man. In Massachusetts, that number is 82 cents on the dollar, again, for the average woman. For Asian women, it's 81 cents on the dollar. For Native women, as well as Black and African American women, it's 61 cents on the dollar. And then for Latina women, it is 52 cents on the dollar. So that's just covering racial identities, age, educational attainment, motherhood penalty, sexual orientation, gender identity, occupational segregation. These are all things that further exacerbate the wage gap, as well as folks who have disabilities also see an exacerbated wage gap. So if you are kind of looking into kind of specific identities and how those relate, I suggest checking out that fact sheet. And then, so getting to lifetime losses, those numbers, the 80 cents, 82 cents, that's just per $1, but if you want to see what that does over the course of your entire career, assuming, let's say, a 40-year career, something like that. For the average woman, you're going to lose between $400,000 and $500,000. For Black women, it's between $800,000 and $900,000. Oh yes.
Did you say for the average woman you would make blah blah?
For the average woman, you would.
So you really mean for the white women?
No, it's the average. It's the average of white women and all the other races. Yes. So it is the average.
Because when you say all the other races are here, that's why I want to know.
Yes. So
Average.
yes. So so here it says white women, but I'm pretty sure the average is between 400,000 and 500,000, in counting white women as well as women of other racial identities. But for Black women, the number is between $800,000 and $900,000, and for Latina women, it's over $1 million over the course of a lifetime. And you can see all of that on equalpayma.com as well. But these are like huge amounts of money. I can't even begin to think of all the things that any one of us could do, to have that much more.
So basically, we just kind of put up this slide in the workshops just to really kind of like have it resonate with people. Like I normally do kind of a moment of silence here for this slide, because it really is, when you think, like I said, thinking beyond that 80 cents, and looking at like the Mass MA website to see like all the coffees you lose and all the things like that. When you contextualize it, it's really devastating.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it puts us back, it sets us back for lots of things. Like saving for retirement is a huge one, right? Like women, especially women of color, we're vastly underprepared for retirement savings. And on average, we live longer than men, so we're really getting stuck there from all angles. But trying to be positive. It's hard. So here we just list some common fears and barriers to negotiating your salary. I know that we have some here, but can anyone offer something that they might feel anxious or nervous about in negotiating a salary, or why they might not want to do it?
I feel like she's mad.
There's kind of the issue of like a timeline. So if you're in a back and forth negotiation, and that takes time, days, weeks, and then in that time they can decide, well, we have these other candidates on hold who might not give us this pushback, that they'll just accept what we give us. And I've been in a situation where jobs kind of been pulled back a little bit. Doesn't that?
Yeah.
I just want to say, number one, absolutely happens. I negotiated a salary, and it was a hot minute before they rescinded it formally. I mean, the whole offer, that was it, dead in the water.
That would have been a bananas place to work, probably, right?
Yeah, but also WTF.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
WTF is right.
Well, going with the difficult or pushy, as a woman, you're seen as overly aggressive, and a man wouldn't be seen that way. They'd
Yep.
be seen as assertive.
He's a leader.
Right.
Yeah. Confident.
They also look at your age, whether you're too young, too old, whatever they want to say it is. So that also comes into play.
Yeah.
Not having good data on comparable salaries.
Yeah. Any other fears?
I work with students, and I think a big barrier is that they don't know that it's common in many fields, so they don't know that their peers are doing it, and therefore that it's even expected in many environments.
Yeah.
I also work in education, and so does most of my family, and it's kind of seen as taking from the students.
Yeah.
So you ask for money.
Yeah.
I think some women don't know that they can negotiate.
Yeah. I'd love to know when in our lives men get that message, but we don't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, we kind of start off talking about some common fears, just to kind of get it out there, just to show like how you all just kind of stood up and participated about your experiences. These are shared feelings that a lot of women feel. So it's good to kind of get this out there in the open at the start of the workshop, so that we're all kind of starting on an even playing field.
And sorry, go ahead.
I think there's also this emotional toll that it takes for women to actually go in, and then it's that rejection. How to deal with the rejection on the get-go. Sometimes it happens a minute after. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So the way that we approach this, and you guys are going to see in a minute, I'm going to have Samantha start talking about our Know Your Value section at a high level. But basically, it's like project managing it, right? I think that we kind of divorce salary negotiation from what we do day to day. And that's where we get the emotion in it. It is very taxing. It's never comfortable doing these types of negotiations. But the way that we talk about it, again, it's data driven. It's how do you speak and communicate the most effectively in business terms. It's how you manage the follow-up. How do you overcome objections? So we get really in the weeds in the 2-hour course about like how to really go in fully prepared so that you can eliminate some of those emotional obstacles. All right, and Samantha.
So I will talk a little bit about this first step in the salary negotiation training, and we can do a little bit of it today, or you can even take it home and do it later. But the first step is, as we've said like 300 times already, know your value. And when we say know your value, we're really talking about that quantifiable you can even really monetize the value that you bring to a workplace, either a new workplace or where you already work. So if you have one of the workbooks that we gave out on page 8, I believe, there is actually some like fill in the blank sections that you can work through on your own time that I find to be super helpful. And anytime we do these workshops, we get a lot of really good feedback on these that are just kind of exercises that you can do, or maybe even do with one of your friends who might be negotiating their salaries soon. But it just talks about the steps that you can take to really crafting your message and your value statements. So am I on the next page? So when we talk about articulating our value, we're talking about, as I mentioned, like monetizing like what you bring to your workplace. So we talk about creating value statements to describe your contributions, your success, and the skills that you bring to everything you do at work. So we use this format to as a recommendation to start that message and start your own a value statement, but obviously you can change it around so it feels more comfortable to you. So for instance, I might say, as a result of my effort to create more access to the Women's Economic Empowerment Series, I've achieved establishing weekend workshops, which provided the Office of Economic Empowerment more opportunities to engage with women who work during the week. But you can, do that in a variety of ways, and there are all sorts of tips that we go through in the workbooks, and we even go through a sample candidate resume who we kind of follow through, Olivia, who I have like a special affinity for this fake woman now because I talk about her so much. But we look at her resume because sometimes it's really hard to just dive in and do that on our own. Has anyone ever come up with a value statement for the work that they do? No? Well, I hope that you will all, I wish we had time to just kind of dive into it now so we could all kind of share our value statements. Yes?
I just have a question.
Sure.
How do you do that if it's a new job?
Well, I think with a new job, you do it with your previous jobs, but you can also, and Alex, I think we'll talk about this a little bit, and we talk about during the full workshop, but you can really look at what skills you're bringing to your new job based on where you're coming from and how, I think when you look at a job description, and actually the sample that we use, she's applying for a new job. So we look at that job description and then we take out the pieces from her resume that really fit well with the job that she's applying to. And that's kind of the biggest exercise that you can really do when you're preparing for both the interview process and then hopefully the negotiation process is really connect the dots, because even if it doesn't sound exactly the same, that's what the interviewers and your future employers are going to want to hear. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, I mean, when you're applying for a new job, it's definitely making sure that those value, and you want multiple, not just one, you want multiple value statements that honestly, this is something that you should be kind of doing on an ongoing basis, especially if you're thinking about pursuing a new job, but making sure that they do align, because it would be kind of bizarre if you were applying, for instance, for like a marketing manager job and you were like focused on your value statement that was around I can't even think of anything. All I think of is marketing. Operations, sure. Not good at things on the fly like that. But yeah, so we'll get into that in a minute as Samantha goes through some of the tips.
So some of the biggest piece of this portion of the workshop is to just teach yourself how to be your best advocate. I always say that I wish that I could bring my mom to job interviews or when I've ever negotiated my salary, because she's my super fan and I love her. But unfortunately, that would be really weird and I wouldn't get the job. Actually, I probably would, because she's hilarious. But so some of the biggest tips that we always give out is to document your accomplishments. I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, so when it comes to negotiation time or when I'm applying to a new job, I'm not going to remember all the little things, the times that like I stayed late or worked on a document from home or worked on something that was completely outside, my job description. So if you document what you do regularly, it doesn't have to be super extensive, but I always recommend just to keep a journal or just a Word document on your computer that you can jot down at the end of the week. That can be really helpful. Like I do this like silly thing called On the Docket, and Sarah can talk to you about it, and actually Chelsea probably can too, my former colleague, because I've been doing it for like 5 years now. But I write down like everything that I'm doing that week, and then I update it for myself, and no one else has to see it. It's like this, I don't even know where I came up with On the Docket, but it's like my little thing, and then at the end of the year I can look at it and see, really quantify like what I've been able to cross off the list and what I've added to the list. I think the other big piece is like think beyond the task. So we get into the weeds about things and we really need to think about the big picture. So don't get caught up in like the small tasks that you do. Obviously the operations and the things that keep the wheels moving are really important, but think about how those things you do contribute to the big picture and really find ways to articulate how your value to your company or organization makes the big picture happen. Quantify your work is really important. So numbers speak louder than words, and be able to quantify what you're doing. Sarah's really good at making sure we quantify everything we do in our office. I'm not a numbers person, so that's something that scares me, but I do know that like with everything you do, how many people have done fundraising in this office? Probably a lot of you, yep. And so when you fundraise, like that when you're talking to a donor that numbers speak really loud to them. So be mindful of that and quantify the work that you're doing, and bring that data into the conversation. If you can bring it into your value statement, even better. And then finally, everything counts. So be mindful of, I can guarantee you that you've all gone above and beyond and outside your job description. Keep a copy of your job description and look at it every 6 months and see if it actually aligns with what you do. But remember those things that you do outside of your realm of possibility and bring that into that conversation.
I just want to add one quick thing. I personally also like to keep like emails or physical copies when people have, said that I've done a really great job or complimented me on something, because someone might just say it to you or tell you, or even write it down somewhere, and you might not remember it. But if you kind of keep a record of those things and you look back, a year later or so, as Samantha's saying, you'll really, it's kind of affirming just in and of itself to see, people telling you, how much they appreciate your work and all the wonderful things you've done. But it also is really powerful and compelling to bring that to your employer and say, hey, these like outside partners and external folks respect me, and they think that I'm, really excelling at all of these things. And I think that that's super compelling to an employer.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm very guilty of not documenting effectively, and I teach this workshop weekly. So another trick that I've picked up is I put work blocks on my calendar. Every week there's some kind of work block, so that even if I'm not documenting, I'm reflecting back on my calendar every couple of weeks to say, like, this is what I've done, this is the impact of it. So you have to kind of build out what makes sense for you. But the point is that you shouldn't wait a full year for your annual review to reflect on your accomplishments. And it's things that you're excited about, things you've learned, things you're proud of. It doesn't have to be everything, like a whole laundry list that you're going to share with your manager. It's largely for you.
May I say something?
Sure.
I have 150 employees, and there's 14 men. The men always will, if somebody says something nice about what they've done externally, the men FYI me, that's it. Okay? So, and I have actually said to the women, you should all be doing that, not only to me, but to your supervisor, because when you're thinking about giving people raises, it starts not when you're sitting down to have the evaluation, but it's all year long. You want to know who's perceived as valuable externally as well as internally.
You want those value statements queued up too, so if you're ever in like the elevator with your CEO, you can quickly like drop a value statement of something that you're proud of. 30-second elevator pitch. Go ahead.
I just have a quick comment to echo that. Also, because you have, as a manager, have 150 employees, you're not going to notice everything that everyone does above and beyond.
Exactly.
So you have to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
toot your own horn, like I said, in a constructive, professional way. And I sense that's my manager when I get kudos from the clients in writing, make sure that she sees that.
Yeah. We're not talking about this today, obviously, because we are focused on these kind of large-scale initiatives, but AAUW runs these workshops at companies. We just recently did a phenomenal workshop at Reebok. We work with Log Me In. Companies bring us into their organizations to run these programs because they don't, especially progressive companies, see this as negotiating against them. They see the value in their employees having the skills to be able to come to a manager and say, like, this is the value I've brought. It's very direct, it's very clear, it's very professional. So companies more and more are recognizing the benefit of that, and that's exactly what you guys are it resonates with you as managers. Okay, so now we're going to talk quickly about just how we talk about benchmarking salary. I want to be cognizant of time, so I'm going to kind of go through this fairly quickly. But basically, when we get into objective market research, we start off by kind of explaining 3 core numbers that we want our participants to walk away understanding how to benchmark. So one of them is their target salary. So this is effectively what you want. You've talked to people, you have done some research, you've thought about your experiences and accomplishments, and you have now set a target salary that this is really what I'm reaching for. What we teach them to do that's different from how a lot of people do negotiation is we actually build this into a range. So instead of coming in again and saying, I want $70,000, you're coming in and you're saying, I want between $70,000 to $75,000. Like, can we meet somewhere in the middle? And what you're doing there is anchoring your range with your target, and you're more likely to get at or above your target salary. And a lot of the barriers that we talked about at the beginning about, fear of the offer being rescinded, fear of coming off as not a team player, things like that. We're not talking about the double bind today either, but those are realities of what women experience. So we oftentimes do have to choose between being liked and being respected in the workplace. Discrimination against women absolutely still exists. So this is just kind of a subtle way that you can come in and negotiate and advocate for yourself without sounding like you're being difficult. You're saying, I'm really excited about the opportunity to work with you. I'm looking for somewhere between $70,000 and $75,000. So do you guys understand? It kind of makes you seem more flexible and like you are trying to work with them, not against them. And basically when you set your range, you can stretch upwards of 20% is normally what we say. So from your target salary, stretch upwards of 20%. Obviously kind of look at the number. If it seems like once you get into the higher ranges, it sounds like a crazy range that you're setting with 20%. So be realistic. But then the third number that you should always go into prepared before you go into your negotiation is your walkaway point. Or your resistance point. So I know we always kind of think about like if you come in with a target, that feels like an accomplishment. But you have to understand it's a matter of financial security for you to think about your budget, think about your expenses, and actually understand what you're willing to accept for this position. And this is going to vary from person to person because sometimes you just need a job. But these are kind of the 3 core numbers that you want to come in having with you. Don't share your walkaway point, obviously. We'll get into strategy in a minute. Don't share that number, but that's kind of like your secret number that like I can't take anything below this number. So when we go through the exercises to benchmark salary, we really heavily focus on 2 websites, payscale.com and salary.com. The reason that we focus on these 2 websites is because it's employer-reported data as opposed to Glassdoor and LinkedIn. They're both great sites to also kind of compare and sort of look at, but the employee-reported data can sometimes be inflated. It's not as accurate, but payscale.com and salary.com are actually places where companies look to them to benchmark how they pay.
I think on page 14 of the workbook, if I'm not mistaken, there are a list of websites that you can go to find this data, and it includes the 2 of them. I think it's page 14.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Department of Labor. Yeah, so there are plenty of places here. But we kind of focus on salary.com in the workshop, and we sort of go through an exercise of benchmarking salary for Olivia Taylor, Samantha's favorite fake person that we talk about in the workbook. But so basically when you search for a position, this is kind of what you get spit back at you. So you kind of see this bell curve, and what it's showing you is based on your location and this specific job title that you've identified, this is the median annual salary for people that are kind of squarely qualified for a position. So this is just kind of a way for you to start looking at and comparing your experiences. You're able to include your education, years of experience, number of direct reports. I believe salary.com also has a way of, they project what the benefits generally are for these positions too. So this data is meant to empower you to see, okay, this is kind of just like a picture of, in Boston, what a PR specialist too might make. So then, the key thing here, and like we always talk about this in the workshops, is how many of you have heard the data about women tend to only apply for jobs that they're like 90+% qualified for? Yeah. That's the only caveat to this slide, is like we spend a couple minutes making sure that everyone in the room sort of understands, you know, just because you might not be squarely qualified doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for the median, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply for the job. So it's kind of like a quick, just some notes while we're looking at this. But yeah, you use this information and any other data points that you can capture to really start thinking about what your target salary should be. And the importance of this is that, you know, most people in the room, I think, know about the Mass Equal Pay Law and how employers can no longer ask your salary history, but it's also something that we internalize, right? So if I'm moving on to another company and the company is offering me $10,000 more than what I made before, superficially that sounds great. But when you do the market research, it actually might be way below what the market pays. So make sure you're not internalizing that salary history as well, because we know that the reason that the laws are outlawing that question is because it's the most pervasive way that the gender pay gap has persisted. And then here's just kind of like a list of benefits. We also, in the back of the workbook, have a massive list of benefits for you guys. Just things to think about when again, we're talking about the full compensation package. So you not only want to come in with the 3 numbers, you also want to come in with the handful of benefits that are the most important to you. So you should know vacation time is key, or health insurance. If you know that you're on your partner's health insurance, maybe that's not as important to you. So understanding the full scope of this is the 3 numbers I need, and then also here are the benefits that I care most about. I'm gonna quickly kind of just move into strategy 2, but how does that all sort of feel? Again, we're doing this so fast because we're just sort of giving you a sample, but if you want to learn more, definitely come to a full 2-hour workshop. So then the final kind of piece of this before we have the participants practice is we talk about how to know your strategy going into your negotiation. So I'm going to quickly talk about deflection, and then I'm going to hand it off to Sarah to share some tips. And then we're just going to kind of like wrap up by kind of chatting and answering questions. But so a key part of strategy in these workshops is deflection. So in almost every job application, you get asked what your target salary is. In a lot of states or employers are still able to ask your salary history. So again, we provide participants with tools, and right in your workbook you'll see sample language for how to deflect these questions. But basically, you want to hold off on sharing your salary expectations as long as possible. Ideally, you're not even talking about salary until an offer has been made. You never want to be the first one to show your cards. If you do really want a job and you're insecure deflecting for too long, or putting in kind of an arbitrary amount in the applicant tracking systems when you're applying, make sure you're well researched, and then also feel comfortable coming back and saying, I had put in this number, but now that I know more about the position. Don't feel like once you put in a number into the applicant tracking system that you're tied to it. You're not. You're so early in the process, you haven't learned anything about the job yet. You have the ability to negotiate later in the conversation, okay? So you want to deflect salary history, and you want to deflect salary expectations as much as possible. So if you guys look in your workbook on page 18 and 19, you'll see that there are some deflection strategies. I always tell participants, read right out of this workbook if you need to. It's normally a conversation over the phone, your first phone screen, that you'll have a conversation about salary expectations. My dream is for every recruiter and HR person to get these same responses spit back at them from our participants. But basically, yeah, I mean, use these, and it shouldn't be an uncomfortable conversation. Definitely feel free to just kind of read right out of this workbook. Do you guys have any other thoughts on deflections or notes here before I hand it off to Sarah?
I think one just quick point about deflection or just showing your cards is if you're negotiating for your salary in a current position, if you're asking for a raise or a promotion, definitely don't show your cards to your employer then. So don't request a meeting, or recommend that you don't request a meeting that's to discuss my salary, because they're going to push it off as much as possible. But you can talk about maybe your career development, or just be mindful of the timeline, and think about, there are some tips in the workbook that talk about just thinking about the best time during the year that it might be to ask for a salary promotion. Maybe it's after you've accomplished something, you've won an award, you just brought in a $10,000 grant into a company that has a really small budget, or something like that. Yeah. But just be mindful of that as well.
Absolutely. And
bless you.
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that obviously your current employer has your salary history. So if you're negotiating for a raise or promotion, you can overcome that. That's where the market research comes in. So it's especially important where if you work for an employer and you're kind of moving up into another step, that you shouldn't get undercut just because you're moving up within your organization. So leverage that data, talk to other people within your teams. What the Mass Law also does is allow you guys to discuss salary without retaliation from an employer here in Massachusetts. So really what all these things are trying to encourage is transparency. So yeah, I'm going to hand it off to Sarah. I could rant about transparency for a while, so I'm going to.
Before we talk about tips for entering negotiation, I also want to point out this handout that's over there. It is about the Massachusetts Equal Pay Law. It's also on equalpaymay.com. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar about the Equal Pay Law. Some of you probably worked on it and know more about it than I do, but I do want to point out one thing. So the law does allow for pay differentials based upon some factors, and seniority is one of those factors, but the law also stipulates that you cannot count against someone's seniority if they took leave for child raising reasons. If they took maternity leave especially, that can not count against someone's seniority anymore. So I think that's important to point out. I feel like that's something that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle, so I just wanted to point that out. And then tips for entering your negotiation. I think bringing notes is super helpful. I think, as some of us have discussed, it can be anxiety provoking. We can be nervous about it. It can be awkward. Maybe we don't want to talk about it. It's weird. So I think having notes in front of you can help avoid some of that kind of nervousness that may cause you to forget what you want to say or not be as confident. You also want to remain positive and flexible. As Alex alluded to, there are a lot of stereotypes working against us for women, especially for women of color, and we should be able to just openly demand what we want, but we have to kind of toe the line there so that they don't feel like we're kind of being confrontational. Going off of that, negotiation, you don't want your employer to feel like it's a battle. You just want it to be kind of a conversation with them, and I think that's going to make them feel most open to you and giving you more money if they don't feel confronted. You also really don't want to get personal. So in the workbook, it asks you to calculate your budget so that you are applying and looking at appropriate jobs that serve your lifestyle, and you do want to do that and be mindful of your personal needs to yourself, but you don't want to tell your employer I just got a new cat or a new dog, and I got a cat 4 months ago.
I was going to say, Sarah really did just get a new cat.
So you don't want to say I have such and such going on, so I need more money, because they don't care. But you want to keep that in mind for yourself, for what you need. You also want to anticipate your employer's reactions and responses, and then craft ahead of time responses back to that. So you're not really caught off guard in the moment, and you can quickly kind of come back to them with something when they respond to you. And finally, you want to have some confidence about it. The employer has picked you, or may pick you if you're at this point in the conversation, and they probably really want to make it work with you. So I know it's really easy as women to think like, oh, we've been offered something, we're lucky to have it, like just take it, it's fine. But it's not, and you're worth more than you think you are, and the employer probably knows that. So you should know it about yourself too, and really advocate for yourself. We're our own best advocates, so I think we need to remember that.
There's data to support that too. Prior to joining this team, I worked for an education tech company where we worked with employers to try to get them to reskill their own employees rather than spending substantial fees in recruiting. It was really about employee loyalty and helping develop their own teams. So we went into companies often and just kind of noted that, companies spend between $20,000 and $30,000 sometimes recruiting for positions, whereas, they have a $1,000 to $2,000 learning and development budget for most employees. So, but that recruiting number is real, and, when you get into more senior positions, whether you're a nonprofit or not, those recruiting fees do exist. So there's actual cost associated with you going through the hiring process, and they've invested not only time but resources and money in bringing you to this point. So you do have some control here, and every employer expects negotiation. So more likely than not, you're not getting the highest offer when you first get an offer, just because it's expected. So the offer rescinded thing, it happens, unfortunately, but it doesn't happen that often. And that's why the more researched and prepared you are going into that ask, hopefully the less likely you are to have an offer rescinded.
Yeah, and I think just another quick thing with that, in HR, if you're already at that stage, they don't want to lose you and go back to square one or go back to another potential negotiation process. So they're usually willing to go the extra mile to keep you, and they also want to keep employees happy and keep them in the workforce because turnover is incredibly expensive too. So it's better to keep someone that they don't need to retrain or anything like that than to lose them. So be mindful that you actually, in a lot of situations, have a little bit of an upper hand.
And I just have one quick anecdote that I like to share during workshops. So I have an older brother. He got an offer this is a very specific situation, but he was given an offer for a professorship when he was a postdoc. And he went back 3 different times asking for, kind of telling them he was going to start at a different start date than they suggested. He didn't ask, can I start at a different date? He just said, I'm going to start at a different date. 3 different times, and went back 3 different times for more money. And so he had no qualms about that. He just said, this is business, like this is what I'm worth, this is what I'm going to advocate for. And we were raised in like the exact same house by the exact same parents. Everything was like equal between us, and I would never, ever, ever, ever be able to do that. So I remind myself, like, what would a man do in this situation? And I just keep reminding myself over and over again that we literally like had the same upbringing, and we have been socialized so differently by the world. So just tell yourself when you're not feeling sure, like a man would go back 3 different times and ask for more. So
Go ahead.
The other thing was, if you're going for a new job or if you're in your job, sometimes companies put down what their range is, what order they're in. So when you come in, you know what range, your own experience, your own worth. So you look and see where you want to go when you come in. I want this amount, your target amount. Start there, not the lowest amount they have for that position. You know your worth, so you're going to go higher than that, but you may not go. The woman person at this point.
Yeah.
I didn't go to the highest.
Yeah.
I just left some room for growth, what I mean? Depending on the court trial for
Yeah.
the budget that they were in. So that's how I do things. I just
Yeah.
this. Once they would talk to me, tell me everything, talk about my, qualifications, all that sort of thing. You make the offer. So
Yeah.
how much were you thinking? I already know.
Yeah.
Right?
So that was the thing that a lot of companies were doing for a while, was post the range. It's still, I see it sometimes, I see it less than I was seeing it for a little while. And I don't know exactly the reason, but I'm curious if part of it is those kind of barriers for women. Like if some women see that salary range and say, oh, I must not be qualified for that job. I'm not sure. It's a guess. But yeah, no, when you do have that information, it's that much more data that you have going in. And you can go in and say, like, is there flexibility in this range? That's what I had to do with this job. I really wanted the job. I love the organization. I love this work. But, you know, coming from tech, I wasn't able to make a transition at the range that they originally set. So you can ask. And again, just make the case. There's always like one woman once a month in the workshops that'll say, well, when I'm looking at the salary.com information, why don't I just ask for the 75th percentile? Why would I ask for anything around the median? And I'm like, if you can make the case for why you deserve the 75th percentile, absolutely, 100%. But you have to be able to back it up with those value statements and that data, just like you would with anything else in business. So there are a couple just other quick things before we move on to just kind of like wrapping this up and answering more questions. But a few other things that we normally talk about a little bit more in the workshops is thinking about language. So Sarah pointed out an important thing. Your brother almost kind of took the assumptive sale approach where like, you've already hired me. This is the next step, is you're letting me push back this hiring date. If anyone's ever like worked in sales or fundraising, it's kind of like this idea that, you know, we're already past this part where you've said yes. We're on to the next thing now. So that's an approach. But the idea is confidence. So making sure that you kind of pull some wording out like the I think, I feel when you're talking about your accomplishments. You don't think that this is your worth. This is what I'm worth. Based off of my research, based off of all the information I've provided, this is the range that I'm looking for and here's why. So pulling out the I think, I feel language. And then also when you're in the negotiation, especially when you're talking to an existing employer for raises and promotions, there's this kind of note at the bottom of your workbook on page 23 that says embrace the we, us. Again, it's just another subtle way of making it feel less of this sort of, you know, zero-sum game between your employer and you. You're in it together. You want to reaffirm why you love working for the organization or the company. Is there a way that we can get to this number? And then if they can't meet you at your number, like, how can we work together to kind of balance out what you guys can't reach in salary with benefits? Again, we're doing this collaboratively. We're trying to make this work together. It's such nuanced things, like so subtle, just kind of the subtleties of language, which you go down a whole rabbit hole with that too. But be cognizant of that. When you go into a negotiation and you create a pitch, which there's some information about building a pitch in here that we didn't go over today, but you're not ever saying, I think I deserve this, or I feel like I've done a great job this year. It's great that you feel that way, but prove it, back it up. And then the only other thing too is that I've kind of used the term like you're project managing your negotiation. Follow up. You know, it's nice to think that like our employers care about us and we put it out into the ether, we make the ask. It's very emotional and stressful and taxing. It's nice to think that they have the time and energy to be following up on your behalf, but help them. You know, it's kind of like what you both kind of spoke to about managing employees. It's helpful if you say to your manager, you know, is it helpful if I share my pitch with you? Is there any materials I can share? Because normally they have to go make the case to somebody else. So providing them with additional information to advocate for you, following up with them to say like, hey, is there any other information you need? If a manager says, you know, we just can't talk about negotiation right now, like maybe in a few months, say, okay, let's get a time on the calendar to follow up and put that 3-month conversation on their calendar. It's on us to make sure that we're kind of treating it like we would anything else. It's uncomfortable, but treat it like any other sort of part of your day-to-day business life, right? Does that make sense? And then just practice.
And I always recommend for practice, if you don't feel comfortable doing it with anyone in your life, you can call any of us. People have called me from workshops before to go over things, and all of our information is at the end of the slide. So, all right. So just a couple of ways to get involved. I did want to point out Brenna, are you in the back there? Yes. So Brenna is here. She's from the city of Boston, so I didn't mean to put the spotlight on her, but she can obviously answer some more questions about the city of Boston's initiatives. But some other ways that you can partner and get involved in your communities are to host a workshop at your company or organization. If you're in Massachusetts, we're happy to help you figure that out. You can become a volunteer workshop facilitator, which I think is a really good way to understand the curriculum better and help spread the word within your community. You can send an empowerment message to friends and link resources from the AAUW and Equal Pay MA. And on that, we even have, we didn't go into all the features of that website, but we also have even like quick videos. We have, I think, a 60-second negotiation video. So if you know someone who's going for a job interview that afternoon, you can even like send that over to them, and it might just have that in the back of their head. And then just in general, help spread the word about AAUW, WorkSmart, the local initiatives, digital initiatives, which I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what's going on with digital with AAUW, but I know you touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, so we just rolled out the soft launch. Again, it has some kinks. We're working on them. But yeah, we're going to be kind of starting probably in the new year doing a bigger push for it, because it's really a matter of accessibility. We recognize, and we've done a lot of work, Brenna and I, on the City of Boston initiative to try to increase accessibility as much as possible. But there are just so many barriers. Like if you have a family at home, getting to a workshop in the evening or on a Saturday morning, you know, even as we kind of shift the times, it's still really challenging. So we wanted to find a way to actually bring the programs to you. And then hopefully it's not something that we've officially discussed with them, but we work very closely with the Boston Public Library system here for the in-person workshop. So we're hoping to also kind of build this into our relationship with them, so that even if you don't have access at home, you have access at the libraries. So I haven't brought that to them yet, but we're going to find a way. So yeah, so more to come. Keep an eye out on our website. But yeah, I mean, we're all just kind of hustling, trying to train 10 million women and really just empower as many women as possible. We want to render ourselves useless is really what our goal is.
I think we have like 5 minutes for questions-ish.
And we have our contact info.
Oh yeah.
If you all have questions afterwards.
Georgia? Is that it? Yes.
Oh, Gretchen.
Oh, Gretchen, okay.
I had limited experience in the workforce, and my most recent experience with negotiating was sort of grad school and kind of thinking, if this school gave me this package, would you be able to match that? Do you ever do that sort of technique when you're negotiating for salary, like maybe more subtle ways, maybe like this other person's, like kind of allude that you have other offers on the table?
It's not the first strategy that we recommend. It's definitely one that you exhaust later. If you're not getting any traction with the other strategies that we teach, which, again, a lot of the information's in the workbook. We didn't get into strategy as deeply because there's a lot of components. So definitely read through here. But it should be a ladder strategy, because sometimes people can perceive it as, okay, they're not that invested in being here. So it works. And I've heard a lot of instances where it can work. It sounds like it worked for school for you, which is amazing. Congratulations for having the confidence to negotiate in that format. But yeah, I would say that's a third or fourth attempt. And you also have to invest the energy in actually making sure you have that offer. Don't lie if you don't have an offer.
And I think it depends on the field too. I don't know so much about grad school, but in terms of like when you already have a job, one of my best friends works at a hedge fund in New York, and she's constantly getting offers from other places, and is like, hey, like I have this offer, it's like 15,000 more, like where's my money? And they're fine with it. And like I don't think that is like acceptable in all sorts of fields or in many fields. So I think it depends on the situation also.
Blue shirt first.
So you mentioned that one of the ways to get around the salary question is to present like alternatives that could be negotiated. So you mentioned like the flexible work schedule, like, and I'm just like outside, or so you don't have like a structured 9-to-5 schedule. But how do you respond if the employer says we have this time that everyone has to be here and that's non-negotiable? Is there a way that you can recommend work around that in particular?
Well, again, you should kind of come in with a handful of things. So maybe like flex work schedule is a thing that you're trying. It could also just be remote work. So you're online from those set times, but you're remote. So So those are some different ways, two different kind of ways that you could think about a flex schedule is like there's the timing flexibility and there's also like the actual remote work location specifics. But if that's, some people, I don't know, what is it like in government? Are you like required to be in the office?
So, well, we have, I think, one of the Mass Treasury has one of the more progressive approaches to work schedules, and I do think we have core flex time. We have core hours between 10 to 3 that we're expected to be there. But I think that if you are, that feels limited to you because of your circumstance, and that's one of your top 3 priorities, because I think that's what I always recommend at workshops is like think about your top 3 benefit priorities and really hold strong to them. Do your research. If you feel like you need to work remotely and you're going to be able to do your job even better, then there's tons of data behind that, depending on the industry. So I think that that's something that there are some benefits that are more flexible than others, like health insurance is usually not that flexible, but the work schedule is one of those things that I think in most workplaces, and I do find especially in the nonprofit sector and in some government sectors government offices can be more flexible.
Well, and you're kind of acknowledging this is a low cost way for them to sort of meet you halfway. You know what I mean? So like you're already kind of coming in under that notion. So yeah, just do the research and bring as much data to say why this is a benefit and why it'll help your overall quality of work. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just probably a question for you, Alex. How I see this immediate post-assessment on the back of the workshop. What are you doing over time to track trainee outcomes? Like, is there a quantifiable amount that you're I made like $3,000 more and reported to AAUW?
Yeah, so these are, you guys obviously don't have to fill this out because you didn't do the full the full workshop. It's just a part of the workbook. But so we do evaluations before a workshop, after a workshop, and then we do one, I think 6 months out and then 12 months out. Something like that. I might be off on the 6 months, but basically, most people don't come out of the workshop and are able to negotiate right away. So and it's something that we're building towards because we've only been in this for a couple of years, we're trying to quantify. We want to see what the long-term return is for women. Right now, the thing that we see the most is that like most women that come out of these programs do take in action. Either it's their intent to go to their manager or it's their willingness to like share, talk about these things with a friend. Like there's always kind of some sort of intent out of the workshop, which is the thing that we're seeing the most results with. But we are trying to, and I think that will be the way that we've been handling the latter evaluations. I think that we're going to try to make them more refined so that we're really just looking at that core data, because that's what we want. We just want to say like, you came to this workshop, even though it's a free workshop, what was the return on investment of your time for being in this workshop? So that's our long-term goal for sure.
I think we have time for one more question. I know that you've had your hand raised for several minutes, so.
This sort of goes back to your tactics for negotiation, but I'm a big advocate of transparency, and I'm wondering, I understand the deflection, but why not be the one to ask the employer early on what they're thinking? I mean, like you're wasting everyone's time if you go through 3 rounds of interviews and get to an offer and come to a negotiation and have to turn it down. Everyone's time, your own time, you turn down other offers in the meantime. So where does that factor into these tactics?
Yeah, we talk about that. Most of the time you will, the phone screen, in most interviewing environments, you will get a range in one of those early conversations, and it is important. I would say like if you don't have any sense of what they're paying, it's absolutely important for you to kind of ask them like those sort of salary questions. Like if there was a range on the job description, is there flexibility in that range as we continue talking about the position? If you are concerned that they might come in at a lower salary and you want to know if the interview process is a good investment of your time, definitely ask, like, does this position already have a salary range? You're opening up a can of worms in a certain way, but you could just continue deflecting and say, like, it's something I want to start thinking about as I learn more about the position. And if they say, is there a number you're looking for? That's where you leverage the deflection language of like, this position's different from my previous role, so I really am interested in hearing more before kind of setting that benchmark with you. But it's absolutely okay to ask. I think you should always think about this as like, it's not you just needing a job. It's what's worth your time. You know, this is about you. Just being confident and advocating for yourself in every part of the process. So absolutely.
So I think we're already 5 minutes over, so, and I know that you probably all want to stretch your leg, but legs or one leg.
However many.
It's a long day and week. But thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit about the workshops and learn about negotiation. And we'll all stick around if you want to ask more questions.